My name is Julie, and I'm quite anxious to share our story. I have a child with chronic intestinal pseudoobstruction, and once I had a proper diagnosis and help from my daughter, I became driven to share our story and bridge that gap of disconnect that we had felt for so many years. So I've written a book that chronicles our life in caring for a chronically ill child and the harrowing process of getting her diagnosed through multiple pediatric systems. The story starts off with me being an all-knowing, expectant mother. I read everything I could, and I never felt confident again in motherhood. I was sent home from the hospital with a newborn with non-moving bowels. It probably shouldn't have happened. I said, "You cannot send me home with this baby." And on into the second week of life through age 2, that did improve. But by age 2, the bowels completely halted in activity, and the pediatrician had no ideas other than over-the-counter medications, and that this was all due to stress with potty training. Very quickly moved on to a pediatric gastroenterologist and described her symptoms of pain, fever, struggling, screaming, being completely inactive, not eating. I had to really work to get an appointment because I did not have a concrete diagnosis or a referral from the primary pediatrician. So I had to learn to be pushy but polite. And she agreed with the pediatrician and said that this was a behavioral issue. And over time she discussed at length about me accepting our life with this child that felt well 50% of the time and felt like she had the flu the other 50% of the time. By age 3 to 4, she could vocalize it better. She admitted to holding it and hating it, and that she was in pain. And the complete helplessness and sorrow that I had as I observed our daughter in pain could not be balanced with the idea that she should try harder to help herself. And the older she got, I realized that she couldn't help it. And the balance of this was impossible, so guilt reigned in our home. We spent 8 years with the same gastro doctor, and her daily regimen increased from just being Miralax to including Magcitrate, Dopalax, enemas, stool softeners, natural homeopathic remedies, anything I could get my hands on, milk and magnesia, castor oil, everything made her feel sick. And I was all over the place as a mother. I call it smothering instead of mothering. And I mixed up doting, scolding, soothing, lecturing, pleading, praising, with only a few brief reprieves in between. So I didn't really know what I was doing most of the time, and I wondered if I was the only mother whose child rejected Disneyland in order to stay home to poop instead. She did consult with another gastro at age 9. She also said, "I have no idea what to do with your daughter. This is behavioral, clearly." She did test her for celiac, and I was told that that test was negative. And I was relieved that nothing was wrong and absolutely insistent that something must be wrong, both mixtures of feelings. And I became very envious of other families that had smaller stresses with their children, supposedly, and mothers who looked like they know what they were doing. It was very isolating. By age 10, she had large joint arthritis in every joint from elbows down, and was hospitalized twice, 1 week each. And to every doctor and nurse that came in her room, I indicated that she also doesn't go to the bathroom for over a week, and when she does, it's the size of my arm. And every one of them told me how normal childhood constipation is, despite the severity I described. Moved on to another rheumatology doctor who also did not connect any of the conditions, and in fact disagreed with the arthritis diagnosis and diagnosed her with a more severe form of arthritis and prescribed a year of immune suppressant therapy. It's a form of chemo that we decided we'd keep moving. And I wondered whose world was this normal in. We moved on to Children's Hospital Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard, and I found the head of pediatric rheumatology, Dr. Reif. He's wonderful, but he had a 4-month waiting list, and I gathered all of our records, gastro and rheumatology, for my daughter for many, many years, and I sent them to the doctor, and I emailed him directly. I wrote a pathetic cover letter that said, "You don't have to see us, you don't have to get us in. I know you have a long waiting list. Please review these records and let me know what to do with our daughter, these differing treatments." And his coordinator called us within 5 days and said that Dr. Reif had approved an appointment for my daughter. He came in plain clothes, met us in the hallway 2 days after Christmas, and he said, "I had to bring your family in and put you guys out of your misery." your child has Crohn's or celiac, I can almost guarantee it. She's like a textbook case. Number 1 symptom is intestinal issues. Number 2 symptom is large joint arthritis. Your daughter's had both. You need to see Dr. Pietzak. Dr. Michelle Pietzak is a gastro doctor at CHLA that only treats Crohn's and celiac. Did take 3 months to get in front of her. She's absolutely wonderful, and finished my sentences for me, connected all the dots, did more tests. She said, I'd like to help your daughter. And she's put on a gluten-free diet. She had many setbacks though. Despite the strict diet, she had 7 more hospitalizations for impaction. At 11 years old, she weighed barely 50 pounds. And Dr. Pietzak involved Dr. Panati, a motility specialist. She is the director of pediatric gastrointestinal, neuromuscular, and motility program at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the Division of Gastroenterology and Nutrition. And we had very sobering conversations with this doctor. I feel like she knew what she wanted to do with my daughter before she ever met her. In reviewing her records, she said, your daughter has been so sick for so long, and she diagnosed her with pseudo-obstruction. And I felt like I learned a lie was true. We were finally on the right path. She recommended surgery, a very drastic surgery, an appendicostomy, which is an alternative to a colostomy bag. They take the appendix, cut the tip off, and create a stoma, an open line that's attached to the back of the belly button, so that the child can catheterize and force a flush at home if they can get some kind of bowel function, which she did. My husband stalled for this surgery. So one more setback of over 2 weeks this time, 16 days. She was admitted and the surgeon was called in, and I was very determined to leave the hospital with a well child. Again, it was very pushy but polite. An ostomy nurse was put in front of us, Beth, and she made all the difference in our decision. She said words I'll never forget. She said, these gastro kids are the sickest kids I've ever worked with. And I wondered how that could be when she works with cancer kids, kids with brain conditions, heart conditions. I said they might die from their conditions, and she said that's right, and they're handled right away. Gastro kids are tossed around from doctor to doctor who don't know how to diagnose them and can't help them, and they lead very sad and sick lives, and their parents are crazed. And she said that the path to diagnosis is often worse than the actual treatment, and that's why doctors call medicine a practice. My daughter did have the surgery. It's been 2 years. Her motility issue is not cured, it's just better managed. She still has lots of nutritional challenges, but has been able to avoid the G-tube. She has lots of formula at home and makes efforts to gain weight. But I do have a healthy, happy child now. And overnight, our lives changed. I almost didn't know what to do with myself. With a well child and a higher quality of life, we have been the recipients of some very great kindnesses in our behalf, and I was unbelievably grateful, but I just felt like I wasn't done. And I very politely informed every doctor my daughter ever met of what her accurate and actual diagnosis was and the treatment for it. And I felt like something good must come from our experience. And so this method of recording these events became essential to me. And it's been a very productive attempt to ease guilt, grief, and redemption. And that's where the writing began. So writing, what a productive outlet this has been. My 4th grade teacher brought my parents in for a conference over 30 years ago and told them that they should look into having my creative writing stories published, which of course never happened, and I never thought about writing a book until now. So I wrote a book that I couldn't find on a shelf, not anywhere. It's a book about living in the foreign land of the medical world with a very sick little girl and struggling to get her diagnosed. It's a very expensive place to get lost in. And I wanted to record things that people said and some key events. I wanted to remember that I might forget. So I started writing, and I wrote for 6 months straight, carried a notebook with me everywhere, and now I've been editing for over a year and have about 300 pages of our life in ink. It's not a how-to book, and it's not a book about just going to doctor's appointments, but about our life taking detours and veering in unexpected routes. And as I wrote, my mind went into overdrive and pushed words forward with a force I had never known. And I was just driven to write and to tell our story. I wrote down thoughts, conversations, points of confusion, clarity, happy times, and some deeply sad things that we went through as a family. And I found that there was great peace in articulating the inner world. And it was a healing process that I didn't even know I needed. And it was reliving a lot that I was quite numb through for the prior decade. I found I was quite unsettled with my daughter's experience, and as humans, I find that we like to speak of our successes and injustices and like to re-examine sadness. And although I was grateful that my daughter was better, I was sick that I could not buy back lost time, our most precious commodity with our children. So I became consumed with the thought that someone after us has to do this better, faster, easier. I juggled feeling grateful and having grief all at the same time, and those emotions helped me to articulate some really difficult areas throughout the writing. After I wrote the entire book, I read it and I told the freelance editor, this is horrible. I do not have what it takes to write. All I have is a bit of wit and grit. And she said, perfect, then just write. All else can be fixed. And I did. I fixed everything. And worst of all, emotions and feelings had to be blended into the book to humanize it. And I did that, wrote to the borders of embarrassment. And it was not a dimension of the writing that came easily to me at all. So it was quite difficult to go through without sounding pathetic, and yet document it all effectively. As I wrote, I continued to also read a lot, anything I wanted or could about health, writing, or fictional true stories, anything motivational. And I read one book written by a woman who had a colostomy bag due to colon cancer. I loved her book. I wrote to her and told her what I liked about it, her sense of humor, her style, and I briefly told her about my daughter and her story. And she responded and thanked me and said, when I hear other patients' gastro stories, I'm so glad all I had was cancer. So I can't emphasize enough the benefits of writing for someone personally. It's almost like do-it-yourself therapy for free. It's equal parts invigorating and gut-wrenching. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned that we don't just admire people that survive difficult times, but we observe how people go through things, how they handle themselves with dignity, being assertive, persistent, having tenacity and grace. Goals I always had, but only attained sometimes. But I do write about being optimistic. I think that outlook trumps circumstance always. And I write about that, and it helped me in caring for a sad child and being grateful despite tough times. So I wrote for myself and for others that I might never meet. We have some beautiful examples in our lives of kindness towards my daughter and family. I wrote because I wanted my daughter to see that being pushy and polite might help her to remain positive through difficult things in her own life into the future and be productive through them. And I wrote so that my daughter could remember that her mother never gave up. And I wrote so that my daughter could remember that neither did she.